Greetings, fellow Demon Slayers. This is Taimanin Mari here today with another video. So for today's topic, I want to just share a couple of builds with you guys. One is a build I made up myself, and I've been playtesting. It's been treating me pretty good. As far as the build, it's basically to see if I can make use out of Maika, so that's what's going to be shared on my end. Another build was given to me on my Discord. He whispered it to me. It's one of my viewers. Basically, when I said I'm going to make Shiranui great again, he shared his Shiranui build with me, and I will share it with you guys, and shout him out when we get to his build. But first, we're going to cover mine because it is a lot more free-to-play friendly. So without further ado, let's just dive right in, get through the video. Okay, so for this build, as far as the supporters, we are using Shirase Yuzuriha. Her passive says increases damage dealt with ranged attacks on snared enemies by 20%. Her actual active ability, which is also a passive, says snares up to 4 random enemies for 6 seconds, and it applies a debuff every 4.5 seconds with a 50% chance. So basically, you're going to consistently have something that's snared on the screen, usually like 2 to 3 things. It's really helpful. Next, we're going to look at good old Maika. Of course, her ability is increases damage dealt with skills to enemies with debuffs by 32%. Now, mind you guys, these supporters are all S level 5. If you have them at S level 1, just cut it in half. And so for Maika, it would be 16%. For Yuzuriha at S level 1, it would be 10% damage. Just so you guys are aware of that. Finally, we're going to come over to good old Fumasaika. She increases damage of melee attacks against snared enemies by 20%. So, I'm pretty sure the synergy is obvious. Yuzuriha is going to keep debuffs up while buffing any range damage you output, while also keeping Maika's passive in play because she is keeping debuffs up. So that 32% damage is insanely helpful. And finally, we have her also keeping Fumasaika's passive online for the additional 20% melee damage on anything that is snared. Now, coming over to what actual skills I'm running with the build. The first skill is going to be Sogetsuin. So basically, this skill works really good because 1, you could shoot it at range, 2, it is ranged, so it will get the damage buff from Yuzuriha, as well as a damage buff from Maika if something is debuffed. And with Yuzuriha causing snares, it's really easy. The good part about this skill being ranged is if you see something across the screen that's snared, you can just charge and shoot at it and get the damage. When hitting snared enemies on criticals, this skill is doing about 30 to 35k per hit, and it does hit 3 times. So yeah, that's a nice fat 105k, like that's not bad. Especially for Shiranui, who doesn't have like insanely high damage like other characters. So I'm enjoying it, and since the skill kind of goes in a sideways wave to start for the first 2 parts of it, you're actually going to be hitting like everything in a cone in front of you, and then the final part is kind of at an angle, so it may only hit like 1 or 2 things. Point being though, it's a good wave clear skill, it's a good AoE skill, and it synergizes nicely with the build. Second, we are running Ganaijin, which is basically her famous clone. We're getting the reduced damage reduction for having 2 blues. Now, as far as the damage up on this skill, I do know for a fact that Maika does affect it because it is a skill. So anything that's snared that gets hit by your clone will take an additional 32% damage. I'm not 100% positive if it affects Fuma as well, because I don't know if the clone is classified as a melee attack, but it should be. Either way, without these 2 supporters, my clone usually crits for about 1200. With them, I noticed the clone critting for about 2000, so someone somewhere is definitely affecting the clone damage output. Mind you, the enemies would have to be snared for you to see that buff, which is no problem with Yuzuriha here. Outside of that, the final skill we are using is her Taimanin art for the increased damage to basic attacks, as well as the increased particle gen from basic attacking. This has made her basic attacks insanely beefy. Now, Maika would not affect the Taimanin art because it is not a skill, it is a basic attack. But the snare from Yuzuriha paired with the 20% damage increase to anything snared from melee attacks has really made her basics hit super hard. I've actually had a couple 30k criticals off of the last hit of her basic chain while farming the gold daily today. So yeah, that's not bad at all. And generally, if she's not critting, she's hitting for 18 to 20k towards the end of her combo, and she usually does about 9 to 12k towards the start of her combo, because as Shiranui's combo goes on, her basics actually ramp up in damage. So, with that being said, it's not a bad build. The only thing I could say I want for it is a better weapon, because right now we're still rocking super rares because I just haven't been lucky in the weapon department for her. But the optimal weapon I would suggest with this build would be the Shikigiri here, because it would also deal defense debuffs to enemies when you score criticals on them. So this would definitely round out the build. You'd have 2 debuff generators, the first one being Yuzuriha with her Snare, and the second one being the Shikigiri with the defense down. And that would definitely keep things going, keep the build in play way more efficiently than it is right now. But for right now, I will say it is working pretty good, so if you want to try it out, feel free. Another character I'll look at in regards to the build I made will be Sakura. It does work on Sakura. What you will have to do is keep Yuzuriha main, keep Maika in the sub slot, and then simply splash in something like Fuyumi, something like Mai, or something like Suzune, just for a generally good blue supporter. Or if you want to more focus what you're fighting, you can put Onigumo if fighting demons, you can put Fuma if fighting machines, and unfortunately you cannot use, where is she? Haruka, because Haruka would need to be in the main slot. I mean, you could throw her in a back slot for reduced damage against humans, but I would rather run Suzune or Mai if you're going to be doing something as far as damage reduction. But either way, the best one generally for damage would be Fuyumi. So if you have her, just throw her in the slot. Mind you, this would be the most free-to-play option out of everything I said. So, how would this work for Sakura? As you can see, we took Fuma Saika out of the build to make it a full blue build by splashing in something like Mai or Fuyumi. And what this does is it allows her Shadow Fling to actually cause an attack reduction to enemies hit by it for 15 seconds, and that is a 30% reduction. What this does is it just simply allows her to spread another debuff on a really short 12-second cooldown, and the debuff actually lasts longer than the cooldown. It's a 15-second debuff. So, 1, you take less damage, 2, you have a debuff, which means that Maika is now in play. On top of that, you have Yuzuriha continually spreading Snare around, which also keeps Maika in play. And if you're in an optimal situation, you would have a Garou Kiba spreading defense down, so any critical would cause that debuff, and that would again keep Maika in play. Going from there, Maika's dealing 32% damage, additional to all skills at S level 5, causing this skill to deal 32% more because the debuff duration is longer than the skill, so Maika will be in play each time you use it after the first time. The same thing goes for Shadow Spin. It will be dealing 32% more damage because Maika will be in play, and since it's doing more damage, that 5% heal that it causes when having a blue set as the main would just be a little bit more beefy. Outside of that, Sakura's signature spin would also be dealing an additional 32% damage. So yeah, you could see the build will get pretty out of hand. Unfortunately, not everyone's going to have a Garou Kiba, but this would be the best in slot item for this build. As far as Yuzuriha and Maika, again, they're pretty free-to-play friendly. And if you're going to decide to run Mai, which is totally fine, she's insanely good, that's also free-to-play friendly. So, moving on from builds for Maika, let's talk about this Shiranui build that was sent to me. And I believe I said this before, but the build would work with anyone. So to do this, we're going to need an invincibility supporter. For me personally, I have Spica, so that's who we're going to use. We're going to need Haru, so let's grab her. And we're going to need Mitsuki. She's around here somewhere. There she is. Okay. So how the build works is essentially you're going to put an invulnerability supporter in the main slot. The person who sent me the build, Ultra, I believe, like it's Ultra Runner or Runner R, or I don't know. I'm going to call him Ultra, but he's pretty active. Like he watches like all of my videos for the most part, and he's really active on my Discord server, and we whisper from time to time. He shared this build with me because he is running it on Shiranui in PvP. So in his case, he does have a Shisui, which would be this supporter. So what he's doing is he's essentially giving Shiranui Shisui so she can have the sweet revive if she does go down, and then he's running the invulnerability along with those two supporters to reduce the cooldown on it. But we'll explain how it works in depth with everything in front of you. Either way, Ultra, this is your shout out, just so you know, like, I didn't make this build, Ultra made the build, I'm just sharing it. So I am his instrument at this point. Now, looking at the abilities. So, we have Spica here. We all know she gives invulnerable. Next, we're going to look at Haru, who would give a 20% reduction to cooldown of supporter skills. And then Mitsuki would do the same thing. So what this does is this gives you a 40% cooldown reduction on your main supporter. This is great for Shiranui because she's basically invulnerable at this point. If you run a Shisui on her, the cooldown of 51 seconds is now cut to about 30 seconds. And the duration of Shisui's invulnerability is 16 seconds. So the cooldown effectively is only 14 seconds that you won't be invulnerable. So, in his experience, he's saying running Shisui has basically made Shiranui seem top tier in PvP because of this. Now, the reason I suggest Spica is because I don't have Shisui. This is what I would do if I were running the build myself. Oh, didn't mean to make her big. So we're going to come back. It works basically the same. We have a 49-second cooldown, so the 40% cooldown reduction would cut the CD down to around 30 seconds again. And she has a 14-second invulnerable time frame, so you only not be invulnerable for 16 seconds out of every rotation if you run this combo. Now, the only issue with this combo is it's a 2 red, 1 blue, so it's a little bit harder to build around. As far as Shiranui, it works well because you can use the Sugetsuin for the increased critical rate, which would also pair well with Spica because she provides critical to melee attacks, and the Sugetsuin would just further enhance that. Outside of that, we're going to be running Taimanin art because it basically works anywhere for her. You'll get the increased damage to melee, on top of getting the increased particle gen. And the final skill, of course, will be Ganaijin, because her clone is pretty much a must in all of her builds, and the damage of her illusion will simply go up by 50%. Another thing to note is that when you do critical, Spica would increase critical damage of ranged attacks as well. So that would pair really nicely with Sugetsuin, which is already a ranged attack. So overall, yeah, it's a pretty decent build. Like, I can definitely see Shiranui bringing the pain with this build simply because she'll be alive to do so. She's going to basically be invulnerable for as long as possible. So I wanted to share that. Thank you for sharing the build with me, Ultra. I really appreciate it. Much thanks. So, if you all wanted to make Shiranui great again, this would be what I do. But, sadly, Spica belongs to Emily, so maybe when I get Shisui, I'll revisit the build and actually show gameplay for it. As far as weapons, anything would really work. Obviously, her ultra rares would be the best. Her critical super rare would even work in this case because of the crit Spica would give you. And of course, Vajra when fighting demons. But if you manage to get your hands on Shikigiri, it would probably work best because the critical rate from Spica may be enough. And if you throw critical Magatama on her, with Shikigiri, you'll be getting a nice defense down on top of it all. So that's the video. Thanks a lot, Ultra, for providing the Shiranui build. I'm sure people who can afford it will enjoy it. And I hope you guys enjoy the Maika build I shared. It's been treating me well, so I hope it treats you guys well. And with that, yeah, that'll be the vid. If you found it helpful or informative, please like and subscribe. And you guys go ahead. Have a great rest of your day. May you have good luck in your gotchas and in the arena. And you dudes take care. I'll catch you tomorrow.